Hello and welcome everyone to another one of my Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. reviews and the 15th episode of the 4th season, which also acted as the winter finale and was titled Self-Control. I realize I haven't done reviews for the 13th and 14th episode of the season, but I've had a couple of terrifying weeks at work. This week though seems to be a bit better, and even if it wasn't, last night's episode happened to be the winter finale as I mentioned, and it was epic to say the least, especially when it comes to what the next arc on the season happens to be about. But I'll be getting to that at the end of this video anyway. So over the course of the latest 3 episodes of the show, there has been a decent amount of Easter eggs and references, let alone the amount of massive events that went down. Once more, I'm gonna say it here, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is making sure, and in so many ways it actually ends up getting a renewal. The show is doing all it can to make us all want more. For some reason though, and looking at its current ratings and viewership levels, the show seems to be in some sort of a critical zone, where there's a toss-up between renewal and cancellation. But anyway, let's focus on the review in last night's episode and worry about that later. So while taking you through my review of the winter finale of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I'll also quickly go through the major events and WTF moments in the previous 2 episodes that led up to its climactic finale.
10.
Now besides the Avengers reference made by Coulson and us meeting Agnes, whom AIDA was based off of, the 13th episode of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which was titled Boom, started off with bringing back the Terrigen crystals that we come to realize Radcliffe managed to take away from Hive at the very end of the 3rd season of the show. And while these crystals were supposed to be used to uncover the inhuman potential of Nadir, they actually ended up turning Terrence Shockley into one, and it seems the show continued its newly found habit of creating supervillains from the comics and not giving them their comic book alter ego names. The Ghost Rider arc on this season introduced Eli Morrow as the villain, but never actually ended up giving him the title of the villain he was, Molecule Man. Terrence Shockley on the LMD arc, on the other hand, was turned into an inhuman supervillain, but never got his comic book title either, Nitro. Nitro in the comics pretty much happened to have the same explosive powers that Shockley had throughout the events of the 13th episode, and which actually ended up killing Nadir.
9.
With the 13th episode ending up with the capture and abduction of Mace by the Superior and his men, the 14th episode of the season and penultimate episode of the LMD arc focused on Team S.H.I.E.L.D. working on retrieving both Mace and May from the grip of the Watchdogs. We also got to see flashbacks throughout the episode of an old mission in Russia both May and Phil went on, and in which, interestingly enough, they discussed the possibility of them having a relationship, considering how they find it hard to have relationships with civilians outside S.H.I.E.L.D., with all the questions their dates end up asking about what they do. The funny thing about that part of the flashback though is that May promised to get back to Coulson on the topic once her current relationship at the time failed. A relationship that we know ended up being the only successful long-term relationship of hers, her marriage to Andrew. Now these flashbacks also explained why the Superior had it in for Coulson. His comrades were killed for losing the artifact that Coulson retrieved from Russia, after which the man decided to investigate Coulson, ended up coming to the conclusion he's the man behind all the things that have been happening in the MCU, alien invasions and Inhumans included. But while retrieving Mace and May seemed to be the major arc of the episode, interestingly enough, AIDA was working on a completely different plan, replacing Team S.H.I.E.L.D. with LMDs. So while Quake seemed to beat the Superior in a not-so-fair fight, AIDA seemingly takes Coulson, Mac, Daisy, and Mace and replaces them, sending LMDs into S.H.I.E.L.D. and bringing about the events of the show's winter finale, which aired last night.
8.
On last night's episode, Fitz and Simmons realized right off the bat all about the new LMDs in S.H.I.E.L.D., and they're trying their best to hide any signs of that knowledge. However, they're kinda pretty obvious, and according to Mace and Coulson, those two should be replaced. Coulson also happens to bring LMD May back up and let her know what he is, that he's nothing but another LMD. He tells her about the framework, how their bodies don't matter, how Radcliffe built a replica of the world only with less hurt. Now this scene wasn't just about the introduction of what the framework happens to be for the purpose of the upcoming arc of the season, but it also happened to be the show's way of getting us into the real Coulson's head, his regrets, the life he wished he would have led, and the things he wished he would have done instead of being in S.H.I.E.L.D. if he weren't to have joined S.H.I.E.L.D. of course. It also does tell us about what we'll be seeing on the upcoming arc of the season with Team S.H.I.E.L.D. within the framework or trapped in the framework, how the real Coulson and the real May are already together in the framework.
7.
One of my favorite scenes on last night's episode happens to be the scene with Fitz and Gemma turning against one another. That was very well acted and very well done. So as they go for the workshop, the LMD detection system detects one or both of them is an LMD, and neither of them knows, the same way May didn't. Of course one of them did. I did find it interesting though, because the first thought that came to my mind was someone manipulated the system to turn them against one another, but the way they acted it all the way through got me to think one of them might actually be an LMD. My bet was on Fitz, even as he seemingly cut his wrist. That wasn't really a lot of blood. The following scene we actually get to understand what Mace meant by those two. He was not talking about Fitz and Simmons, but rather about Simmons and Daisy.
6.
The scene with Daisy discovering the containment room full of her clones was just perfect and kinda creepy, and a good start for her in fighting the new forces within the S.H.I.E.L.D. base, as she goes all Quake on Mac to start with. Moments after she escapes Mac, she actually checks the surveillance all over S.H.I.E.L.D. and realizes there are more LMDs in S.H.I.E.L.D., that being Coulson, Mace, and the out-of-commission Fitz. As she finds Gemma in hiding though, we yet again get to see another well-acted scene of fear on both ends. Only this time, the fear is actually real on both ends, and not just one. This episode was not just good for a comic book show, but it brought out a whole lot of acting talent for many of the show's stars.
5.
Halfway through the episode, we realize the Superior is kinda getting his own LMD, only this one will be connected to the actual living brain of the man. And that happens to be AIDA's plan to be able to tap into the parts of the Darkhold that she couldn't figure out with her not being human and all. And while this season had 2 titled arcs so far, Ghost Rider and LMD, and happens to be about to enter a 3rd one when it comes back from its break, the Darkhold seems to be the greater arc of the season, and the common denominator connecting all these 3 arcs. AIDA as well happens to be changing. We could all tell with her seeming discomfort a couple of episodes ago when she realized who she was modeled after. The way she ended up taking the necklace on Agnes like she felt she was not special, realizing she doesn't feel things that others seem to feel, and actually wanting to have those kind of feelings. And it is that change that gets her to the point of actually rebelling against Ratcliffe, slitting his wrists, and forcing him into the framework for good.
4.
There was of course the reference to Lincoln's death on the finale of the 3rd season, and Gemma believing Daisy wants to atone for that by sacrificing herself. I've got to say, this is the most I've enjoyed watching both Bennett and Hanstridge on screen since the show started, because this wasn't about them being part of a comic book based show like I mentioned earlier, but more about them delivering a great episode with great acting talent. I also loved how a lot of characters were portrayed on last night's episode. I mean, they were playing evil versions of themselves, and they were doing it so well.
3.
Now, contrary to what Gemma thought, Daisy wasn't sacrificing, or at least didn't want to sacrifice anything, or anyone for that matter. She did seem to have the plan of taking the LMDs down, and without hurting a single other soul, using the sleeping gas to knock all the agents and Inhumans within the base down, leaving the LMDs alone to face off with her. But there was the second half of the plan, with Simmons waking up some of the agents, and using their help in waking up the rest of the agents, loading everything and everyone into the Zephyr before the base burns to the ground. And just when everything seemed to have worked out perfectly for Daisy and Simmons, they are met by LMD May sitting on a ton of explosives at the entrance to the Zephyr. They're also about to be surrounded by a whole bunch of LMD Daisies, an LMD Coulson, and an LMD Fitz. Only lucky for them, LMD May is not programmed the same way the other LMDs in the base happen to be, but instead has a high level of emotional awareness.
2.
Just like the last few minutes of the fall finale acted as an introduction to the LMD arc, the last few here did the same for the upcoming arc. And Daisy's plan here seems to be plain and simple. Both her and Gemma hacked into the framework, found out their avatars running around the place, and decided to plug themselves into those avatars, find their friends in a way to wake them up, and hence manage to find their bodies as a following step. Piper's question though seems to be the most important question here. Will it be easy? I'm no writer or producer on the show, but let me tell you right now, right here, it won't.
1.
Hello and welcome to Marvel's Agents of Hydra, where one of our dead characters is back, alive and well, happens to be Daisy's boyfriend, and is not the one currently a series regular on the 2nd season of Blind Spot. Yes, it's our favorite baddie of the show, Grant Ward. In this reality though, that is not all that is different. Coulson is a teacher, preaching to his students against inhumans. Mac is a daddy, and Fitz seems to be a filthy rich guy. Simmons apparently has a tombstone to her name, and May, she's an agent of Hydra. The most interesting part about all of this though is that the Agents of Hydra arc will be starting when the show comes back from its break, but it is going to exit right back into the LMD arc, as the team still has to get out of the grips of AIDA and the now mechanical Ivanov, controlled by the man's actual preserved brain. I believe though that this whole situation with Hydra in the alternate reality happens to be a natural outcome of changing the lives of all these people that actually managed to be part of bringing down the villainous organization. I also don't think Gemma is really dead in that reality. I think it's more her death being faked. After all, both her and Daisy made it clear they did find their avatars running around, which of course didn't necessarily mean the act of running, but rather alive and existing. And unlike the others who were plugged into the framework, they had no regrets changed, hence how Daisy ended up with Ward, and I'm assuming Simmons ended up as part of the resistance to Hydra, and is probably being waterboarded somewhere in their huge, magnificent base. But with that being said, let me know what you thought of last night's episode. What the hell do you think happened to Gemma as she went into the framework? Did she actually die? And if so, who's the woman with Fitz in that reality? And of course remember, it would be really appreciated if you drop me a like if you like this video, and if you subscribe if you want to see more reviews of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on What the Geek. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon.